Did you know that no matter what camera you use or how boring your location is, you can actually shoot cinematic footage as long as you kind of implement 7 tips that I'll show you in this. And they're really simple tips that even beginners can master, and it doesn't matter where you are and how boring your location is. Also, the more you use the tips, the more they'll just become second nature to you as well, so you won't even have to think about it when you go out and shoot. Have you ever watched a scene or filmed a scene where everything is whipping around really quickly and you can't really keep up with what's going on? This is something that a lot of beginners tend to do because they want to get as much of the scene in as possible, but there's a better way of doing it. If you can slow your movement down and then just choose parts of the scene, then that's going to look a lot more cinematic. So you can break the scene down into different chunks and just film each scene very slowly, and that's going to give you a cinematic look. But here's a pro tip, because if you do actually want to get the entirety of the scene, then do it very slowly, and then in the edit you can apply what's called a speed ramp to get you from point A to point B in the clip without missing anything in between. Making your movements quite slow does come at a cost, so if you find that you're using a camera that doesn't have great stabilization, or you're just using a small camera like the Osmo Pocket 3 like I'm using today, and your footage when you're being really slow with your movement is a little bit jittery and a little bit shaky, the way that you can make this smoother is by actually shooting in a higher frame rate. So if you're shooting in 24 FPS or 25 FPS or 30 FPS, try shooting in 60 or 50 FPS and then slow the footage down in the edit. And this is going to basically smooth out the footage and make it look like there aren't really any jitters or any shakes. One of the ways to enhance that cinematic feel of your videos is to actually get ambient sounds. So if you're in an environment and there's traffic, for example, or just anywhere where you've got that ambient background sound, you want to try and pick up those sound effects as well. But sometimes it's not always possible because the B-roll might come out with the audio just not being usable. So it could be really windy like it is today. And so that's going to basically stop you from getting that clean audio. So the best way to do that is to actually apply sound effects after the fact. So one of the places that I really like to get sound effects from is Motion Array, because you can search for a sound effect and you can find something that you kind of think is going to work, but then you can actually download an entire folder of similar sound effects, so you don't have to go through and individually download different ones that you think are going to work. You'll just get a folder which have ones that are quite similar, which is really, really handy and saves a lot of time. You also don't just have to use Motion Array for sound effects, because there are loads of plugins that allow you to apply color grades or motion graphics. Plus, another way to really capture that kind of cinematic feel for your videos is to apply music, but the right kind of music. And so Motion Array has a really vast music library with different genres for different moods, so you can pretty much put your video together using the whole suite of plugins from Motion Array. And I will come back onto music later on when I start to build out this whole B-roll sequence, but I have dropped a link to Motion Array in the description. So thanks to Motion Array for sponsoring this video. Have you ever watched a video and then seen a scene in it where it just looks completely static, like an image? This happens when you've got your camera set down on a surface or a tripod and there's absolutely no movement going on in it, so you can get completely confused as to whether it's actually an image or an actual video clip. So what you want to do is always make sure that if you're going to have your camera set down on a tripod or a surface, to have some kind of movement going through the frame. Whether that's, if you're outside, there's some leaves moving around or there's people moving around, just some kind of motion that makes it look like it is actually a video clip and not just a still image. One of the things that I learned very early on when I was trying to get into video was learning about framing and composition. And one of the things that always kept coming up was how a lot of beginners will just film everything from chest height. So everything always looks the same, nothing looks creative or like there's any variety of shots. So one of the things that you can start to do is just bending down and getting low to the ground to try and get shots that way. Those kind of shots look really cool. And then also looking up. So looking up what's above you, what's out in front of you, which is a little bit higher up, rather than just everything being shot from your chest. This next one is actually one of my favourites because it works really well for revealing shots, so the kind where you go from behind an object to revealing the scene in front of you. But it can also work very well for static shots, so if you've just got your camera on a surface or a tripod. And basically what you want to do is have an object very close to the lens in the scene, and this is going to make sure that the object that is in front of the lens is out of focus, and then everything beyond that object is going to be in focus, and it just creates some nice depth within your scene, and it creates a cinematic kind of look. And so yeah, like I said, this works really well for revealing shots, and if you do end up using it for a static shot where your camera is just on a tripod or a surface, you just need to, again, like earlier, make sure that you've got some level of movement in your scene so it doesn't just look like a still image. And then lastly, this one is something that I mentioned briefly earlier, but if you want to create a kind of a mood and a certain feel to the video, and you want to convey something specific, then using the right kind of music is going to do that. And again, you can go to Motion Array, they have loads of different music tracks, different genres, different moods, and you can choose the one that's going to fit the video the best. And you really need to think about what you want the viewer to feel when they're watching your video, and that's going to determine what music you use in the end. So there are two other tips that I would want to share with you, but first let me show you the B-roll sequence that I shot in this very boring car park and try to make as cinematic as possible with the Osmo Pocket 3. So at this point you might be thinking, okay, but what about lighting? What about manual camera settings? And I purposefully didn't go into that in this video because I wanted to keep it as simple as possible for anyone who's just starting out, with tips that you can just implement without having to fiddle around with different camera settings and fiddle around with trying to figure out your lighting and that kind of thing. But if you want to go deeper on being able to manipulate your settings more, subscribe, because I will go through that in another video. And if you like to look at the footage from the Osmo Pocket 3 throughout this video, then you can check out the description because I've dropped my link to my Lux, and that's what I use to colour grade the footage. All shot in normal colour profile.